help women, save lives, and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. And she just came out. She told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. We had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I'm Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. And today we are going to talk about what Christians think about abortion. That is often thrown in our face, and we will give you the facts that are encouraging and discouraging today, as that is our topic. And special shout out to a wonderful Christian, and we know what he thinks about abortion, and that is the Reverend Brian Walker, who suggested this topic and gave us a couple of insights as a pastor. And the great researcher Steve Carlin did a deep dive, and we have some great statistics from our friends at the Family Research Council, and we will break down what Christians think about abortion and what they want to hear, what they don't want to hear, and we'll do that by denomination. So it's going to be juicy today as we get into church, politics, and abortion, all three. So joining me today is somebody who thinks that abortion is bad and is himself a Christian, and that is Mr. Steve Carlin in Madison, Wisconsin. Steve, how are you?
Hey, Sean, I'm doing great. This is the strange month of the year where it is very much summer by you, and it is no longer summer by me.
I wasn't going to bring up weather because we're still hot, but there's hope.
Okay. Light at the end of the tunnel.
The light at the end of the tunnel. We have not hit 100 in like 2 weeks, so I will take that. I know it sounds so stupid. We're like, it's only going to be 98 on Tuesday. You know, just like these absurd statements start coming out. It rained for 10 minutes. You know, count your blessings. So we are still in a drought. Everything is dead, and I don't know what to say. It's just all we're doing is complaining about it. My question for you, that is not what I thought you were going to say, but so this podcast is coming out on September 12th?
Yes.
Have you been to a Packer game yet with your new tickets?
No, we started out on the road for a couple of weeks.
Oh, delayed gratification for Steve Carlin this fall.
Yeah, so but we'll get there. We'll get there, and it just builds the anticipation, the enthusiasm, and the excitement.
Well, we're going to want full reports, and because of you and these tickets, which of course are a result of the podcast listeners voting and telling you to get the tickets, we need to sort of take them through the season, and because of that, I'm rooting for the Packers this year.
That's very kind of you.
Yeah, it's easy because I don't think they're going to be very good and a real threat to the Cowboys. So it's sort of an easy, it's more so out of pity.
That
to
kind.
Support you. It's that kind of, yeah. I am rooting for the Jets who got Aaron Rodgers. I would like to be, because Aaron Rodgers with the whole vaccine thing is too funny. When he said, I've been immunized, which I guess is just a made-up word that he created in a stroke of genius. And so because of that and just him BSing the sports media as one of the greatest players of all time, I just found the whole thing comical. I'm rooting for him now that he's playing in the Jets. Of course, the Jets are in New York. Everybody's had 30 vaccines by now. But I'm rooting for Aaron Rodgers. Are you rooting for Aaron Rodgers?
So this is where it gets complicated, Sean, because the Packers traded Aaron Rodgers, as you know, and what they get back depends on how good or bad the Jets are and how much Aaron Rodgers plays. So We get a first round pick back if Aaron Rodgers plays 65% of the offensive snaps. But then where that pick is depends on, where the Jets finish in the standing. So if the Jets could finish dead last, but Rodgers plays the whole season, the Packers will get the first overall pick in the draft. So that is my sort of dream scenario. The genie comes out of the lamp and asks me for my first wish. That's what I'm wishing for.
Yeah. And it's, I think I speak for the listener. It's complicated, your wish, but I understand how it works. And if I were in your position, I'd be keeping up with that first round draft pick. That's kind of a big
forget
deal,
the 401k, forget how the market's doing, the price of commodities. I got my eye on that tracker. We need a tracker on where is the Packers draft pick from week to week.
The ongoing cultural upheaval, the destruction of the family, and what's the Jets' record, and has he gotten to the 65%?
We survived Favre leaving. We can survive anything.
That's true. Okay. All right. I think this podcast is going to be very popular because we don't like hearing the pro-abortion folks say most Christians love abortion. Like, let's say they did, which they don't, and we'll cover that today. Let's say they did. Wouldn't they just be corrupt and scandalous Christians? Are those the Christians we're going to listen to? The Christians that call evil good? So this whole you're a hypocrite argument, which is a big deal. It's like when these conservatives, and I understand why they do it. So you have Al Gore, you have the environmentalist, and they get on their private jet to fly around. And you're like, you're a hypocrite. You're leaving your carbon footprint, and yet you claim the environment. And I know some of that's true because some of these people think we should all be on bicycles, right? And so I understand it. Yeah, eating bugs. And so for those people, I guess it's just totally hypocritical. But otherwise, they don't actually think that the ice caps are going to melt and we're all going to be dead in 5 years. I mean, otherwise they really couldn't get on the jet. Maybe they could, but they really don't believe it to the level that they proclaim. Just like a Christian who is involved in not just typical sin, like we're all sinners, but some public scandal where they're out saying one thing and absolutely doing the opposite. They're out saying, I'm pro-life, abortion is evil, and they're paying for their, daughter's friends to go in and have abortions. They're just bad, right? It's not a mark against the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We ultimately can't bring him down from the cross. So it's one of those where it gets really old, where they shove the opinion of uneducated or unfaithful Christians to take away our point that we shouldn't kill a baby. So with that said, in this, Steve, you did a deep dive. And by the way, I know I mentioned them, but a lot of this is from the Center for Biblical Worldview at Family Research Council. Family Research Council is awesome. They're honest. Anytime they put out any kind of research, it's well done. It's not biased. They are Christian, obviously, but they're not out to prove our point. There's no poll that says 99% of all Christians are absolutely 100% pro-life. But this was a great survey that they did on American Christians and their views on abortion. And it's not just the people we're talking about. It's not people in Christian in name only. It's faithful people, faithful meaning they regularly go to some sort of church.
At least once a month, and 3/4 of them go weekly. So these aren't the folks who are I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and then they kind of claim the mantle while they repudiate everything that their faith stands for. These are folks who are active.
Yeah. So we're definitely going to have some liberal Catholics in here because you have to go to Mass every Sunday or it's a mortal sin. But to keep holy the Sabbath. But if you're more than 70% attend weekly across the board for all the Catholics and Protestants and evangelicals in this. So that's a good chunk of regular, faithful, this is a priority, we don't miss. So the summary, I guess, before we do the deep dive is there's obviously good news and bad news in this, but Steve, there's also a lot of opportunity that I didn't think we'd find whenever we started getting into this.
Yeah, when we find ourselves in a mess like we have with abortion, where there are still nearly 1 million abortions every year in our country and tens upon tens of millions of abortions worldwide every year, I think it doesn't just help us to assess where we are. We need to do that, but we need the roadmap of how to get out of where we are. And I think that this survey on where Christians stand on abortion, I think it provides us with something of a roadmap, because we see what people's attitudes are. What is their opinion? What do they want? What are they rejecting? What are they closing their minds and their hearts off to? And I think there's a lot of reason for hope. I feel that way about the broader culture. We've talked about that before on the podcast, that when most people, even secular people, even people who describe themselves as liberals or members of a party that endorse abortion up to birth, when those people learn the truth about abortion, they reject most, if not all, abortions. And I think it's the same thing here within the church. There's a lot of what you might call bad news, but we see how we can turn that bad news into good news.
I think so. And the first big stat we'll give you is nearly 2/3, so 63% of all U.S. churchgoers identify as pro-life. So
yeah,
that's so just 22% self-identify as pro-choice. And this is where you can actually identify something. It's not like they're saying I'm a dude, but I'm a woman. This is like the accurate self-identify. So I guess most people would look at that and be like, okay, great. 2/3 of Christians are pro-life. And then the obvious point is, so 1/3 of all Christians who regularly go to church in the United States believe abortion is okay.
Yeah, or they don't have a strong opinion on it somehow. I don't know how that can be the case, but I agree. At first glance, if you look at, say, like over 1/3, 37% of Christians don't identify immediately as pro-life, that seems to be something of a dumpster fire. Bad news, right? And in a way it is, but on the other hand, what we see here is only 22% identifying as pro-choice. This sort of exposes the myth that it's that being pro-choice and Christian is a mainstream position. It is not. It is still a fringe position. And that's why we see all of these PR stunts where you've got Planned Parenthood's clergy advisory board, and you've got the Clergy for Choice, and you've got the Catholics for a free choice group, and you've got these so-called clergy blessing abortion facilities. I think this number really here puts to rest any misconception that is real, that is fake, that is a stunt, that is an act, that is pure theater to try to make people think that being pro-abortion and Christian is a mainstream position, but it's not. We're talking about 1 in 5 here. Still too many, but it's not like we're 50-50 like the rest of society. You kind of hear, well, we're 50-50 on stuff and the church is no different. Well, the church is different. Nearly 2/3 understand quite clearly that it is wrong to take the life of an unborn child.
Yeah, it is. It's clearly the majority. And also this whole notion that the abortion industry has gone God. It was Alan Jackson that sang Gone Country. He's gone country. They've kind of gone God the last 15 years. Like, hey, we're good people too. We believe in God. And they've sort of tried to slap the Bible, clergy, being a good Christian in the abortion playbook. And they never really did that before 2006, 7, 8. I think Obama's administration made this kind of a thing. Like, you can be a nice guy, you can be a Christian, you can be a good person and hold the Bible in one hand and the scalpel in the other. And it just doesn't work. Most abortionists are very honest about why they do what they do. But this sort of marketing to God, dragging they're usually very dysfunctional members of the clergy out for public display, and they come and they say abortion is a blessing. It is something that God wants us to do. It is something that he has given us and given women, and all of that stuff. That's fairly recent. That's fairly new, the last 15 years. And And I think it's awkward and people don't believe it. I mean, even Planned Parenthood, when Planned Parenthood of Eureka did a mock 40 Days for Life campaign, which I wrote about in the beginning of the end of abortion. And we got them legally on a copyright violation, but they mocked 40 days and they had 40 days of choice. And every day had a scripture and every day had a devotion about today. We thank God for the gift of abortion doctors. Today, we thank God for healthy access to reproductive rights in Africa. You know, I mean, all of them were offensive, but some of them were just comical, where they're just like, today we're grateful for the lightning that will strike the pro-lifers outside. I mean, it had a scripture, it had a devotion, and then it actually had a prayer. Planned Parenthood did not like that. This was an affiliate in California, Eureka, California. But the corporate types, they didn't like that, because there's just no need to get into justifying and using God and Jesus to justify abortion. It's not a good route for them. It's like when they had the Choice on Earth Christmas cards. This is where this started. That was 2005, 2006. Choice on Earth Christmas cards. And it had Mary and Joseph on the donkey going through to Bethlehem. And it said Choice on Earth, not Peace on Earth, because peace is, I don't know, the opposite of abortion, but choice on Earth. And I just think, we have in here they started blessing abortion facilities and doing all that stuff. I think that's a really horrible reaction. You have Catholics for free choice, but nobody listens to those people. They're a bunch of nuts. You can't have anything. You can't have Catholics for free choice or Lutherans for free choice or Baptists for free choice, because a part of, I know we hate the term organized religion, is that you're not disorganized and you go after every whim and fad in the world. It's not conforming to the world. It is conforming to Christ through some sort of organization and struggling to do that daily. So the whole fill in the blank religion for free choice just doesn't exist.
We talked too about, sorry, Sean.
Go ahead.
We talked too about how there's such division and polarization on abortion. And in many ways that's true, but I think there's one area in which you could get 80% agreement. And that is, if you were to poll people honestly on, would you prefer to think about abortion or to ignore abortion? And I think 80% would say that they prefer to ignore it and not think about it. And there's 10% of people who are listening to the 40 Days for Life podcast who recognize the crisis of it. And yeah, they're willing to think about it. And you've got the radical lunatics who are pro-abortion and they want to talk about it and wear their I had an abortion t-shirts. But most people just really would not like to think about it because it's controversial and it's uncomfortable. And I think that's where Planned Parenthood is getting it wrong, and why corporate didn't like what they did in Eureka is because they don't need Christians to come out and be radical pro-abortion advocates. They need Christians to just say, I don't really want to think about it, so I'm going to let you do what you want to do with your God and the privacy of your, room and your own prayer and things like that. I think they just want to, their winning playbook is to get people not to think about it. And that's why it's so goofy when they bring out these folks, but they have to at the same time, because what do we see here? Again, 1 in 5 Christians is pro-abortion. They're desperate to do something about that.
Yeah. And a lot of the roots of abortion are from atheists, well-known atheists, and a lot of current abortion supporters are atheists. And the last thing they want to see is some pseudo-Catholic or Baptist preacher out pretending to be for abortion. It's just kind of and Planned Parenthood propping them up. It's just, I don't know. It's know thyself. It's not their base. We deal with this with the workers, the abortion workers who are there and they're trying to convince themselves they're doing God's will. They either end up converting or end up quitting or end up crazy. Those are usually the 3 avenues, because you can't do it. You can try to do it. You can try to do it peacefully over time, but over time, you're just either going to quit doing it because it's not working, or you're going to go crazy. But the whole I'm a good person too, and I'm a good Christian, and that's why I'm here doing abortions. There's just no need to get into all that. There is absolutely just set up an abortion facility, say you're serving women, and go for it. You don't need God. You don't need the Jews. You don't need the Methodists. You don't need the Catholics. You don't need the Bible. Just go do your abortions. And that is, they've gotten into this. And it resurfaces, particularly with the overturning of Roe, because they want to have it both ways, Steve, and then we'll move on. They want to say, oh, most Christians are for abortion. That's not true, as we just pointed out. Or they want to say, we live in a theocracy, and it's led by Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett and Alito. So which is it? Are we nutsos who want to give women the death penalty? One of the dumbest things, many dumb things that Nikki Haley said when she responded to abortion in that debate. Do we want to do that and we're crazy? Or do we not care and all Christians are pro-choice? And so it's you can't have it both ways. And it's important to point out because it's the inconsistency post-Roe. Removing Roe, that's why overturning Roe was so good. Removing Roe made these people talk about abortion and defend abortion. And it's a mess because they've never had to do it because of Roe. Okay. The next point. More than 1 in 6 church-going women have had an abortion.
Yes, and almost as many men have paid for or actively encouraged an abortion. And this is a number that at first glance, it might be scandalous. Like, ooh, even in the church, we're talking 16% of women have had an abortion. That's bad news. I think we want this number to be higher, Sean, not because I want more women in the church to have abortions, but because I want more women who have had abortions to be in church, to come back to church. This is an area where we talk about we're a movement of converts. Well, let's go out there and win more hearts, change more minds, and bring more of these women who are hurting in the wake of their abortion and men who are hurting in the wake of abortion as well. Let's get them into the pews where they can find healing.
And this stat doesn't surprise me. It is lower than I thought. I know at one point it was 1 in 4 in the Catholic Church will have an abortion. So you could throw out a stat that says 10 in 10 church-going people are sinners. Part of it is the climate that we live in. Of course, abortion, just because you go to church doesn't mean you're not going to be susceptible to this cultural upheaval the last 50 years with the sexual revolution and the introduction of abortion, and it just not affect the church, particularly at a time when I think Christianity has been extremely weak, certainly in national leadership, but just in clarity. And so, of course, you're going to have people who think abortion is okay or just don't care. Their faith isn't strong enough to resist it or whatever. But the 1 in 6 is actually surprising to me. I think it's much lower. The general public is 1 in 4. But I know, like I said, at one point in the late 90s, it was for the evangelicals and the Catholics, who were the most staunch pro-life groups traditionally in the U.S. It was 1 in 4 for both of them. So, you make a great point, though. I don't know if they broke that down, but do they regret it? Like, do 1 in 6 women, because if you look at the converts, if you ask a congregation, raise your hand if you had an abortion and people are willing to do it, it's going to be, a solid group of people because we've had 1 million abortions a year in our country for 50 years. But whether they regret it or they're supportive of it or whether they're glad that they were able to do it, or they still support it, that would be interesting. But currently 1 in 4 church-going women have had an abortion. Okay. This is an interesting one. This is where we really get into the numbers and how they can be skewed. Most Christians aren't hearing about abortion at church.
I imagine this comes as a surprise to absolutely nobody, right?
Okay, so disclaimer, because this is like bringing up when Brett Favre left. Do you support the Packers? Do you support Favre? This is equally as controversial. So I grew up in East Texas, which is 2% Catholic. We had great young Irish priests, particularly. It was great. It was a very conservative area. The Baptists ruled the day. Many of my friends had never even seen a Catholic priest before they went into my Catholic school. We heard about abortion growing up. We heard about it. I realize not everybody did. But the endless rant of the pastors are silent does have a cap. So we will share this information. And of course, pastors have been silent. Of course, they're scared to death. Joel Osteen went on national TV and said he didn't want to get into politics, so he wouldn't address abortion. I mean, we've heard all these absurd things. We've heard it from Catholics. We hear from Catholics every election because there's some Catholic running. There was one a few years ago named Joe Biden, and it's just an absolutely useless response all around for the most part. The guy who's blatantly and proudly been pro-abortion for his entire life. And he just, nobody says anything. So we know that rant exists and it's validated. We're going to resist that, Steve, because everybody has their own, the church doesn't say enough rant, and just actually give you the numbers, because some people say the churches are silent, and we just need some meat behind that. So the first point, fewer than half, 44% of Christians have heard a sermon or a teaching on abortion in the last year. I'm shocked that's so high.
You're shocked, forgive me, Sean, you're shocked that a full 44% have, or you're shocked that more haven't?
I'm shocked that 44% have heard a sermon on abortion in the last year. If you'd have asked me this before we did this podcast, I would have said 23 or 24%.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, I was surprised by that too. It's one of those, like many of the numbers in this podcast, it's one of those things that is simultaneously encouraging and discouraging. Objectively, that's bad, but relatively speaking, like, oh, not as bad as I expected it was going to be.
Yeah, I think we have to consider, and this is the difference between our parents, Steve, because our parents are baby boomers, and we rip on the baby boomers a lot. But the reality is that to defend the baby boomers, they grew up in a different America. And some of them haven't realized that Leave It to Beaver is no longer on TV, and it's not 1956. As Peter Kreeft said, the 50s weren't the perfect time. They were a bubble. They were fake. And then the bubble burst in the 60s. And that, it'd be frustrating if we had their upbringing and we were like, wow, 44%. We used to watch Fulton Sheen on television. Billy Graham would go on the late night shows and talk about Jesus. All this stuff was so great. And now 44%. And you and I are coming at it going, dang, that's almost half. They've heard a sermon about abortion. We're taking over.
Well, here's the number that really shocked me. Among all the different Christian faith traditions, everyone except for Catholics, it was a minority. Catholics, 54% of Catholics had heard a teaching or a homily on abortion in the last year. That number blew me away. I would have guessed Catholics would have been actually probably lower than the mean, because just, I don't know, you get a lot of different flavors of the faith in the Catholic Church.
Well, since we're Catholic and we have some personal experience, I think we can opine on this. The reason for that is because young priests are so pro-life. And there's more young priests, vocations actually within the Catholic Church. I share this with our Protestant brothers and sisters, and they're like, this is really encouraging to hear, just as from a cultural standpoint. Young seminarians, young Catholic seminarians, young Catholic priests are far more, for lack of better words, conservative or faithful, we'd say orthodox, faithful to the teachings of the Catholic Church, and are willing to share it. Doesn't mean they're young, judgmental jerks. It means they're usually young, very joyful. We're very inspired by John Paul II. We're very inspired by Pope Benedict. And there's this extreme, just pouring out of vocations across America, particularly in the South, the area of our country that has not traditionally been super Catholic. But when you see these dioceses, Memphis, Nashville, Atlanta, Birmingham, Alabama, Charleston, South Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, just booming in vocations. Little Rock, my hometown of Tyler, Texas. It's just crazy, and so younger priests are getting ordained. They were raised in a much more black and white time period. It wasn't like the 70s and 80s where everybody's kind of confused. I mean, pro-life wise, they were born in the 90s. They have their own ultrasound photo, and you just see a lot more young, not only an increase in the number of people that want to be priests and are being priests and sisters and nuns, but that they're more faithful. There's more of a rigor to their faith because of their generation and the time in which they live. So it's just encouraging.
I think this is an area too where we see the Dobbs effect. What would this number be before the Supreme Court agreed to take up the challenge to Roe v. Wade? Probably less. This is an area where I've said to people all
because they had to address it. Are you saying they had to address it a year ago?
It's in the news right now. The abortion industry wants to ignore abortion. I said earlier, even most pro-lifers, I think, would prefer not to think about abortion. And right now, we've got a lot of pro-lifers in states like California and New York and Massachusetts. And well, I'm glad Roe was overturned for those of you in Texas or Alabama or Idaho, but it doesn't help us. Well, this is where it does help you because it's in the headlines, and the headlines are where Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry don't want abortion. And when things are in the headlines, they make their way to the pulpits. And I think that's a factor we're seeing here. It's that if you're a pastor and you don't acknowledge the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it's kind of an elephant in the room.
It is. And during that time, May of 2022 with the leak, and then June and July with the overturning of Roe, I have to say I was traveling a lot, and I was bouncing around, and I went to a number of different daily masses and then Sunday mass. And I remember constantly hearing about abortion for the reason that you just said, Steve. And after mass, I would always think, or Mary Lisa and I would talk, or whoever I was with, like at a daily mass, we'd talk. There wasn't one priest that I thought they wouldn't have said that unless this was in the news. I'm saying that as a sign of encouragement. Like, I didn't hear, how you can tell a priest or a pastor is like they kind of crawl up to the pulpit like, crap, I got to address this thing that's going on in our culture, and I really don't want to. There was none of that. And I remember thinking all of them, and I knew a lot of them, even some vaguely, but I knew who they were. And they addressed abortion, and I thought they would have done that anyways. Like, they talk about abortion every year. This was just, and it was all a celebratory thing, by the way. It was all like good news of what was happening. But with that said, I think you're right. I think there were a lot of churches that just thought we have to address this. And we did the podcast on it. Back in 2022, we still see it now. Some of it was like, hey, they overturned Roe, but remember, we love women. And you're like, yeah, no, we've always loved women. This is a great thing. But even when they address it, they're sort of apologizing for it, But it's a great point that you made. It definitely went up in the last year. It would be interesting. It's going to be interesting a year from now to see.
It will be. It will be. And I think this is also one of those cases where we talk about, like, there's bad, there's good, and there's opportunity. I think this is an opportunity because you and I are actually pleasantly surprised that almost half of American Christians have heard about abortion from the pulpit in the last year. But if you're taking the other end of that spectrum, you're like, no, I appreciate you guys trying to, put a positive spin on things, but this is a disaster. It's a joke when the greatest human rights crisis of all time is getting ignored by over half of the pulpits in the country. Even if you take that position, anyone who hasn't heard about it from their pastor can still hear about it from you. And that's why community outreach is such a vital part of a 40 Days for Life campaign, is because our job is not to try to convince the pastors to do outreach. We can have that outreach ourselves. We can have it in our conversations with our loved ones, with the people who are in the pews next to us. Maybe we can't get someone to talk about it from the pulpit, but they'll give us the opportunity to have the 40 Days for Life outreach table before or after the service or the mass. There's a lot that we can do without having to kind of outsource it to those who are ordained.
Yeah. I was a history major, Steve, and my senior thesis was on slavery and Catholicism.
Ooh.
And it was interesting. Yeah. It was interesting because you had priests in the South who would preach against slavery. Not the most popular thing in the world. So then, because it was causing uproar, because you had other denominations saying slavery is a gift from God. So then you would have bishops in the South call out the priests saying, you can't preach against slavery. What are you doing? And that resulted in the Pope in Rome calling those bishops to task, saying that slavery was a grave moral evil and every Catholic needs to stand against it and reject it. and then the American bishops kind of rebelling and not wanting to listen to the Pope. We had some issues of that in the 1990s. And so it was just really ironic to see, and that's the history, certainly of the Catholic Church, but also many other churches, is disobedience, right? Disobedience. But I thought it was very ironic because we face that today. You know, you hear all the time about, it could be the opposite. It could be a priest saying, look, there's a lot of issues. Abortion's not number one. And, you know, sometimes you need an abortion, and the bishop coming down on them, which is great. And then you also have priests that get in trouble for preaching out against abortion. But it was so interesting. And there's a great new article if people want to read it. I think it was Scott Hahn. I'm not sure. Somebody just released it on Catholicism and slavery. And it's very fascinating because you have a minority religion in the South that was against slavery, but they were caving, and their authority, who was in Rome, had to sort of step in. So anyways, this is just the history of our frailty here that we're covering. Okay. I guess we should ask the question. We kind of covered it. Should we just complain about the clergy, Steve?
I don't think it does a lot of good. I think it sets us back. I think there's always that temptation. But you know what? When we complain about others, first of all, it's uncharitable. I suppose that should be our first and foremost reason for not griping about our pastor if we think our pastor is doing a lousy job standing for the truth. But beyond that, it's going to get back to him. And is that going to make him more or less likely to talk about abortion? I think less likely. I think we need to, not only do we need to not gripe about our pastors when we think they are weak on speaking the truth on these tough issues, but I also think we need to have their backs when they do, to encourage them, to thank them. A lot of them feel on the hot seat, right or wrong. They're concerned. Maybe they're concerned about the donations. That's a weak sauce reason for not speaking the truth. But there's a lot of different pressures. And so I think the least we can do is have their backs, tell them that we appreciate it when they cover it. And that can go a long way. We need pro-life clergy, but pro-life clergy need to hear from us too.
Absolutely. I think we need to spend more time supporting those who are willing to speak out. The other thing is, you know, I discern the priesthood, Steve. You know a lot of seminarians. I know a lot of seminarians. I know a lot of priests. Their job's not to run around and talk about abortion. I think it needs to be addressed frequently, like throughout the year. But the goal of the priest or the pastor is the salvation of souls. That's the number one goal. And that means reflecting on the life of Christ in every sermon, not being about abortion or any other current event, but about digging deep into our Lord's parable about the virgins who ran out of the oil, you know, and asked for the oil from the virgins who came prepared, and the final judgment, and, you know, just these rich, you know, scripture readings that need to form us in our faith to give us the energy to fight out into the culture. That needs to be priority number one. And then in the midst of that, obviously, throughout the year, addressing the many elephants in the room of our culture and doing it head on. But I think some people aren't content unless the priest gets up there and talks about abortion every weekend. And I don't want that. That doesn't help me spiritually all the time, or certainly help my kids. I mean, there has to be a formation of our souls so that we can go out into the world. I think that's important to address. Sometimes you'll have people complain that the sermon was too spiritual. And I'm like, don't think that's possible.
That's kind of screw tape letters, right? Isn't one of the things in the screw tape letters where C.S. Lewis is saying, if you can get the patient, they call him, if you can get the patient to turn his faith into, like, associate it so closely with a particular cause that the cause becomes primary over the faith, you've got him. And I think, you know, it would be tempting to say, like, oh, but abortion is so, it's different, but in some ways it's different. In other ways it's not. If we're going to have our faith right and our spiritual life is right with God, we're not going to make a mistake on abortion. But if we make abortion everything, there's a lot of ways that we can begin to neglect some of the other fundamentals of Christian life.
And it's seasons, so it makes it more powerful. I mean, I think people should expect a sermon on voting during political season. And they should expect a priest or a pastor to say, you can't vote for somebody who supports abortion. That is a grave evil, and you are participating in it, you know, and break down what that means, what it doesn't mean, and kind of give a theology of it. But we expect that during election year. If you say it every Sunday, every year, it's not going to have the impact. But I don't think we're having that problem. I think there is a lot of silence, and they don't want to address it. And we see that with other issues. You see it with divorce. You see it in the Catholic Church. You get contraception. For sure, the homosexual crisis, transgender. Some of this they don't know how to address it, but I hear abortion touched on a lot. And have my whole life. And so I've been very grateful for that. And I realize a lot of people haven't had that, but I'm definitely not one of those people that's like, well, I never heard this growing up, because I did. And I heard it said well and lovingly and directly and clearly. So, okay. Number 4, this is encouraging. Christians want to learn about abortion at church.
I think this is an area where I realize that I'm an idiot, because I said earlier that I think like 80% of Christians. I said earlier 80% of Christians, I think 80% of everybody would probably like to think less about abortion. And here we found out I'm dead wrong on that. Only 13% of Christians said that they want to hear less about abortion at church than they currently already do. And 70% said they want their church to provide more education related to a biblical view of abortion. That is incredibly good news. This is one of those opportunity categories here where it's easy to despair. Oh, not even half have heard about it. Well, not for lack of hunger, it appears.
No. This is the most shocking thing in this podcast for the listener. I know for me, 13% want to hear less about abortion. I mean, here's what this goes against, Steve. This goes against the people just go to church because they want to feel good and get a pat on the head and be told that it doesn't matter if anything bad is going to happen to them. God wants them to be rich and happy and have a perfect tan. And that's Christianity, the wealth and prosperity gospel. And that's not what, only 13% want to hear less about abortion. Abortion is not an uplifting topic. It's a difficult topic. It's a controversial topic. It's a personal topic for many people. And that's very encouraging. That's a hunger for truth. If only 13% want to hear less, and then 70% want more education and more resources. I know we work in the pro-life movement, Steve, so we're sort of like biased towards this, but this is a big part of why 40 Days for Life has grown. And not just grown like the vigils, because that's our bread and butter. That's what we do. We go out, we peacefully pray on the sidewalks, we offer alternatives, we help the workers leave, we do all those things. But this has really taken off. The podcasts, the magazines, our in-person trainings, the books. So many people told me to write a book for many years. The first one came out in 2013. It was awesome. And then I was like, okay, I did that. And then we did the beginning of the end of abortion in 2018. And Steve, you look at our book, What to Say When, you and I didn't expect that to do very well. We were just like, people are asking for it. Let's throw it out there. And I remember laughing. It became a #1 Amazon new release and a #2 Amazon bestseller. We share that because we didn't expect that. We're not bragging on that. We're proud of it now. It's awesome. But it also shows that there was a huge hunger. And that's what these stats show, that people want more. They want to know how to articulate something. They want to know what to do with the uncle at Thanksgiving. They want to know, their coworker. Now we have Jen Psaki running around saying, oh, no, nobody wants abortions at 40 weeks. That's a myth. And we're like, I don't know. I think Cuomo, lit up the Empire State Building 4 years ago, by the way, to celebrate it. So I think the hunger is very, very healthy. And frankly, it's surprising because this could have gone the other way. Tired of politics from the pulpit. I'm
going to share with you a very self-indulgent story, but I think you're going to like it, Sean. You talked about the regional trainings that we did. We did one in Denver last month. It was great. We had people from 4 different states come out. Leaders get trained in how to make their upcoming campaign the best it can be. And our conference room at this hotel was right next to a Weight Watchers meeting. And so we're right there. Like, we've got our table to check in, and they've got their table to check in. And the people that were, I don't know if they were attending or running the Weight Watchers meeting, but came over like 40 Days for Life, like from the podcast. We love the podcast. So they were into it.
40 Days for Life, like from the podcast. You're like, that's the opposite. There's 40 Days for Life, and then from that came a podcast. Oh, that's hysterical. I did not hear that. All right, shout out to Weight Watchers.
Hey, here's on a more serious note, though I think that is very serious. I take that seriously. Something else that was even more surprising to me, Sean, and more shocking to me than that people want to hear more about abortion. 71% of the Christians said that their moral and religious beliefs have the greatest influence on their views about abortion and human life. Their political allegiance was only 11% in second place. So they were just lapping the field multiple times. People are not looking to their priors, as the social scientists say. They're not looking toward their biases to determine what they think about abortion. They're looking toward what their faith teaches about it. Opportunity all over again.
Yeah, politics, to repeat what you said, is so 71% say it's their moral and religious beliefs. Only 11% say it's their politics. This is so crucial for us in a post-Roe world, because this is a messaging issue. When they run out and they say, we need to have travel vouchers for women who work at Amazon to go fly and have an abortion. We need to deny health care to a baby who survives an abortion. We need to deny that abortion survivors exist, like they did to DeSantis. I met a lady named Penny, and she survived an abortion. No, she didn't, because abortion kills. She'd be dead. You're lying. It's propaganda. You know, these odd messaging approaches that we're seeing, that's great. Because if you're just a Democrat, you would say, great, I'll take abortion through all 40 weeks. But most Democrats don't want that. That's why they're going back on it. And that's why that stat is so encouraging, that it's 71% say it's their moral or religious beliefs of the church-going people. So that means that, I guess we could say, the church is voting its conscience. I don't know, Steve, and I know we can't go off track. I don't know how that relates to where you see, like, what was the percentage of the Catholic vote that Biden got? And I know the Catholic vote is not the church-going Catholics, but those who identify as Catholic. What did he get? He didn't get over 50%, did he?
That's a good question. I think it was a slim minority, but I'd have to double check that.
Yeah, I want to say it was 47. That's from my memory. It's still a shameful number. But this isn't those people, for the most part. 11% are, because these are people that are going once a week. And I did see a breakdown of the stats of the Catholics who voted. You know, anytime you vote for a super pro-abortion president, Obama, Biden, Hillary, it's the people who haven't been to church in 25 years and, like, maybe have their grandma's crucifix in their closet somewhere. You know, so it's the laxed cultural Catholics from the Catholic point of view.
I've got 50-49 here. 50 for Trump, 49 for Biden among Catholics, according to the Associated Press.
So they split it. So the 50 are pretty much, the 50 for Trump are pretty much in here. And what they're saying is, it wasn't Donald Trump that made me pro-life, which I think is just kind of funny, since he spent most of his life supporting abortion. But it was my faith and my moral and ethical views on it. So that's encouraging, because that transcends politics, and we want that.
Yeah. And those aren't official numbers, by the way. Like, nobody is registering to be a Catholic voter versus an atheist voter versus a Protestant voter. So these are all sort of projected based on exit polls and other things. So I did find another one, Sean, that estimated 51-47, just like you said. So yeah.
But that's a lot of opportunity. That's still a lot of opportunity with those people. Okay, our last point on this. A strong majority of churchgoers 62%. Said their church provides specific and meaningful assistance or support to women facing an unplanned pregnancy. 62%.
I don't know if that can be accurate, Sean, because I was told that Christians only cared about the babies and didn't do anything to support the moms.
It's true. We don't care about the children once they're born. Everyone knows that. It's very, very common. Except for the fact that we're doing all this for women with children and women who choose life.
I think this is really good news because I think this is a dramatic undershot. I think that the real number is probably much higher because there's probably a lot of people in pews who are, maybe they're pro-life, maybe they're not, but they're just not paying attention to like every ministry and every apostolate in the church. When this came out, I had to stop and think, like, I'm very involved in my church. My church is very pro-life, and I had to stop and think, like, okay, what do we do? Oh yeah, we do. And in many ways, I'm a part of a smaller church, and we're partnering with other churches. So I could see how a lot of people might not know with certainty that their church is actively involved in supporting expectant mothers and unplanned pregnancies. And furthermore, this number is just institutional support. It doesn't count all of the churches that probably have very active members who are out volunteering at their pregnancy help centers, funding their pregnancy help outreaches, all of those sorts of things. So I think 62%, that's a big number. I think in reality, it's probably missing a lot.
I think it's probably 90 because it's skewed, and we can just go through a big chunk. Number one, it's every Catholic church through Rachel's Vineyard or the Gabriel Project. So those are diocesan, and they're in every diocese. So that's every Catholic church has these programs, okay, across the country. It doesn't matter if the priest gets up there and he's dressed as a clown, carrying around a pride flag. The church still has that available. And so, thank God. So that's number one when you cover the Catholics. The Protestants and the evangelicals they smoke Catholics in the amount of ministries they offer. And I've just never, outside of the pro-life movement, liberal, big mega church, they all have stuff for women who are facing an unplanned pregnancy. They all have, some of them have like free medical care. Just your most pro-life, lukewarm pro-life Protestant churches have something, has been and certainly the ones who are super pro-life. They're very involved, have ministries that help women, and are also most of them help build the network of pregnancy centers across the country. So you're looking at every Catholic church, liberal or not, and you're looking at the majority, not the majority, but almost all evangelical churches, and even just these big, you could take your most liberal like church and they have something. So it's a skewed stat, but
case in point, here's a random piece of trivia that I think is fascinating, Sean. See if you know. Do you know who people you would not associate with each other? Two people who forged an adoption initiative in the United States back in the 90s worked together to start an adoption center.
All right, this is a trick question. Is one of them Ted Kennedy?
No.
Okay, I like bringing up Ted Kennedy to you. Okay, who is it?
Hillary Clinton and Mother Teresa. It sounds like a joke, right?
Yeah, but they were friends. They weren't friends, but they were friends. So that, there's the great story of Mother Teresa at the White House, and of course she reprimanded the Clintons. She didn't reprimand them, but she said, at the prayer breakfast where she confronted them, don't send a child away to abortion. Bring the child to me. I will care for the child. I will love the child. The greatest, attack on peace is abortion. But there was another scene where they were at a dinner, and Hillary Clinton asked Mother Teresa, "Why do you think there's never been a female president with all of our freedoms and everything we have in the United States?" And Mother Teresa, without blinking an eye, said, "You probably aborted her." And
shots fired.
Yeah, but Hillary Clinton said, and I believe her, and I've heard Mother Teresa talk about this. Mother Teresa was a big letter writer when she met someone, and she would always pray for you. And Hillary Clinton, throughout the rest of Mother Teresa's life, said that she would go on a trip And when she'd come back, there'd be a note or a card from Mother Teresa saying that she loved her, that Jesus loved her, and that she was praying for her. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. And whether you loathe Hillary Clinton or not, she's a human being. And if you're around Mother Teresa, that impacts you. I don't care who you are. And so it's like nobody's irredeemable. I mean, Hillary Clinton has a heart. So I think she was deeply moved by Mother Teresa. And I believe that. I definitely believe that. With all due respect to Ted Kennedy. I thought he had a shot at it. Ted Kennedy's the one. This is relevant now, especially Ted Kennedy's the one that said the FACE Act does not apply to Planned Parenthood escorts. It applies to women going in for an abortion. Hey now. So when Mark Houck got into that altercation with a Planned Parenthood escort, and I don't know, something crazy like the FBI raids his house happens, one of the first things we pointed out in court is that you arrested him for the FACE Act. The FACE Act doesn't apply to Planned Parenthood escorts. You can just ask Ted Kennedy, who conveniently was on the record saying that. So anyways, our shout out to Ted Kennedy. Okay, quick review of these. What do Christians think about abortion? Number one, nearly 2/3, 63% of U.S. churchgoers self-identify as pro-life. Number two, more than 1 in 6 church-going women have had an abortion. Number three, most Christians aren't hearing about abortion at church. That's fewer than half, 44% have heard a sermon in the last year. Number four, Christians want to learn about abortion at church. And number five, a strong majority of churchgoers, 62%, say their church provides assistance and support to women facing an unplanned pregnancy. So that is our quick deep dive into Christians and abortion. Very encouraging news, some discouraging news, but a lot of opportunity for growth. And I think it will really give us confidence as we go into the largest 40 Days for Life campaign ever, which will start on Wednesday, September the 27th. And I want to encourage everybody to go to 40daysforlife.com and sign up for your hour. Now's the time to do it. Don't wait. Help your local leader. You have an hour. You got an hour at some point in this fall. We're not saying you have to do one per day, although that's allowed, or one per week, although that's allowed, or even one per month. But you can do at least 1 hour at some point. And I would encourage you to do it in the first few weeks of the campaign, because when you do it, you're going to want to go out again and pray. And it happens all the time. And so you will grow spiritually, and you will also be a witness and could save a life. What else can you do this fall for an hour where you could save a baby? It's just awesome. And it's not rare. Happens all the time. And it's about to start happening a lot in a couple of weeks. So go to 40daysforlife.com, sign up to be part of it. Thank you, Steve. Be sure to rate, review, and share this podcast. And we will see you next time. God bless you.